What if I told you the worst decisions in history weren't made by fools or villains, but by people just like us who thought they were making the right choice? The Challenger launch, Napoleon's invasion of Russia, Blockbuster rejecting Netflix. We look back now and say, how could they be so blind? But here's the unsettling truth. Every one of these decisions made sense at the time. In this video, we're breaking down why even the worst choices had their own twisted logic, and how the same psychological traps that shaped history's biggest disasters are still influencing us today. And by the end, you might start wondering, what decisions are we making right now that future generations will look back on and say, how did they not see it coming? Stick around, because you won't want to miss this. What makes a decision terrible? 3 things. First, it led to disaster. Lives lost, businesses destroyed, reputations ruined.
It is no joke, it is the real war. It has been a very severe attack.
Second, there were clear alternatives. Better choices existed, but they were ignored. And third, in hindsight, everyone regrets it. The moment has passed, the damage is done, and people look back asking, would we have made the same mistake in their shoes? But here's the catch. People don't try to fail. They don't wake up and decide to make catastrophic mistakes. They act based on what they know, what they believe, and the pressures they face. Before we dive deeper, think about a time when you stuck with something. Maybe a bad investment, a failing relationship, or a project that just wasn't working, because you had already put so much effort into it. That's sunk cost fallacy. Now imagine making that mistake, but at a national scale. Let's go back in time to one of history's most infamous blunders, Napoleon's invasion of Russia. As we examine this colossal error, ask yourself, would you have made a different choice? It's 1812. Napoleon is at the peak of his power, having conquered most of Europe. His empire is vast, his army is unstoppable. Imagine marching into Russia with 600,000 men, convinced of victory. Then the cold sets in. Food runs out. The roads are filled with frostbitten bodies. Imagine standing in a sea of frozen corpses. Once a mighty army, now a graveyard stretching for miles. You're one of the lucky ones, but for how long? His empire? Doomed. But what if Napoleon had stopped at Poland? What if he had waited for spring or secured a stronger supply line? Would Europe look different today? Would France still be the dominant power instead of Britain? Today, it seems like pure arrogance. But why did Napoleon do it? Here's his logic. He had never lost before. His previous campaigns had all been victorious. Why would this be different? When success becomes routine, failure feels impossible until it isn't. European warfare favored quick victories. Prolonged wars weren't common, and he expected Russia to surrender fast. He miscalculated Russian resistance and winter. He assumed he'd get a decisive battle, not a long, drawn-out campaign. This is a textbook case of overconfidence bias. When someone is too successful for too long, they start believing they can't fail. Overconfidence bias is when past success blinds us to potential future failures. Think of it as getting used to winning so often that defeat seems impossible. But before you judge Napoleon too harshly, ask yourself, have you ever ignored a warning sign because you thought you knew better? Maybe a piece of advice you brushed off, or a risk you underestimated? If so, you might understand how even the greatest minds can fall into this trap. And this mistake wasn't unique to him. The Roman Empire made the same error, expanding too far, believing they could maintain control, ignoring warning signs until it was too late. As we pivot to the next example, let's compare this with a technological marvel that was supposed to revolutionize travel, the Hindenburg airship.
The German Zeppelin Hindenburg, queen of the skies.
Like Napoleon, the engineers behind the Hindenburg ignored numerous warnings due to their past successes. Designed to be the future of luxury travel, it ran on highly flammable hydrogen gas despite safer alternatives like helium. The logic? Helium was heavily restricted by the US, and Germany needed an alternative to keep its airship industry alive. Engineers believed proper safety measures would prevent disasters. The disaster? On May 6, 1937, as the Hindenburg attempted to land, it burst into flames within seconds, killing 36 people and effectively ending the era of airships.
The actual crash of the Hindenburg, an airship destroyed in less than half a minute, seared and scorched skeleton of what was once a mighty airship.
The bias, overconfidence bias, and normalcy bias. Engineers assumed prior flights had been fine, so nothing would go wrong this time. It's easy to look at the Hindenburg and think, who thought this was a good idea? But history proves that humans have an extraordinary ability to ignore risks in favor of progress until disaster strikes. Fast forward to today, private companies are racing to commercialize space travel.
In a year's time.
In the last few months.
Early next year, very few months.
Sometime next year.
By the end of the year, we should be taking members of the public into space.
Safety concerns exist, but confidence is sky high. Sound familiar? Could overconfidence lead to the first major disaster of the space tourism era? Take a moment to reflect on this. Imagine you are one of the engineers on the Hindenburg project. With each successful flight, would you have started to overlook the risks, just as they did? Think about today's push for electric cars. The industry is booming, but are we ignoring risks? Battery shortages, charging infrastructure, reliance on rare earth metals? Are we setting ourselves up for a major collapse? Sometimes, bad decisions don't start bad. They become disasters because people double down. The US in Vietnam. NASA with the Challenger, both examples of the sunk cost fallacy, the belief that because you've already invested so much, you can't turn back. Every US president from Kennedy to Nixon knew Vietnam was going badly, but pulling out meant admitting failure. So they kept sending troops, believing just a little more effort would turn the tide. It never did. NASA engineers warned about faulty O-rings in cold temperatures, but launch delays had already cost millions. The leadership ignored the warnings and moved forward. The result? A tragedy that could have been prevented.
Obviously a major malfunction.
Now, think about this. Have you ever been in a situation where everyone around you seemed confident about a decision and you felt the same, only to realize later it was the wrong call? Maybe it was at work, in a project team, or even planning a simple event that didn't go as expected. How did group confidence influence your decision? And history repeats itself. Think about the Titanic. When the Titanic struck an iceberg, there was still time to save more passengers, but the crew delayed evacuation. Why? They believed the Titanic was unsinkable. They didn't want to cause unnecessary panic. They assumed they had more time to act. Their hesitation cost lives. This was a classic sunk cost fallacy. Because so much had already been invested in the belief that the Titanic was indestructible, they ignored immediate warnings. And here's where you come in. If you were in their shoes, would you have acted differently? Or would you have hesitated too? Today, we see similar overconfidence in industries like AI. Some believe AI will revolutionize the world without consequences. But what if they're wrong? What if we're accelerating toward an AI disaster we won't see coming? Now let's consider a modern corporate blunder. Ford spent $250 million developing the Edsel.
This is the Edsel. It looks expensive, it acts expensive, but it is unforgettably original.
Expecting it to be the next big thing in American cars. Their logic? Market research showed that American families wanted a stylish, high-tech, mid-range car. Ford listened to the data, investing in flashy features and aggressive marketing. The disaster? The car launched to poor sales. Americans actually wanted smaller, more affordable cars due to an economic recession. Instead of listening to shifting trends, Ford doubled down, producing more Edsels, only to scrap the brand in just 3 years. The bias, confirmation bias, and status quo bias. Ford relied on old market data rather than recognizing consumer preferences were changing. And this isn't just a 1950s problem. How many companies today cling to outdated trends, thinking they know better than the market? In the early 2000s, Netflix offered to sell itself to Blockbuster for $50 million. Blockbuster laughed them out of the room.
And basically they laughed at us. They laughed at us because of the hubris that in the heat of a dot-com meltdown, this upstart direct mail video business would dare be worth $50 million. And it was crushing.
Today, Netflix is worth over $200 billion, and Blockbuster is, well, gone. Blockbuster wasn't stupid. They just fell victim to status quo bias, the belief that because something worked before, it will always work. They saw streaming as a fad, not the future. They assumed customers still wanted the in-store experience, and they prioritized their short-term profits over long-term adaptation. The result? They were left behind. But what if they had bought Netflix? What if they had pivoted to streaming before it was too late? Could Blockbuster have been the giant instead of Netflix? And this happens all the time. Companies refuse to adapt. Governments ignore change. People cling to outdated ideas, assuming things will stay the same, until they don't. And that raises the question, are there blockbusters today? Companies or industries refusing to see the writing on the wall? Think about that. Finally, consider the case of Coca-Cola's attempt at innovation. Coca-Cola reformulated its signature drink in 1985, replacing the classic Coke recipe with a sweeter, Pepsi-like formula.
Coca-Cola is about to announce what it calls the most significant development in its history.
Their logic, blind taste tests showed people preferred the new formula, and Pepsi was gaining market share. So Coke wanted to fight back. The disaster? The public hated it. Even though the taste tests were accurate, people didn't want a different Coke. They wanted the Coca-Cola brand they had grown up with. Within 3 months, the company was forced to bring back the original formula as Coca-Cola Classic. The bias? Over-reliance on data and emotional blindness. Coke focused on taste tests but ignored the deep emotional connection people had to their product. And that's something to remember. Not all decisions should be based purely on logic and numbers. Sometimes, emotion and brand loyalty outweigh data. As we wrap up today's journey through some of history's most infamous decisions, let's recap what ties these stories together. Overconfidence, ignored warnings, and the sunk cost fallacy have repeatedly led to disastrous outcomes. From Napoleon's frozen retreat from Moscow to the fiery end of the Hindenburg, if history proves one thing, it's that bad decisions aren't always obvious. The real question is, right now, in our time, what decisions are we making that future generations will look back on and wonder, how did they not see it coming? Right now, what's the next Titanic? The next Blockbuster? Are we blindly walking into an AI disaster? A financial collapse? A political crisis? Let's test history. Drop your predictions in the comments. If you enjoyed this deep dive, hit that like button, subscribe for more content. Thanks for watching, and let's make better decisions together.